Working late at the office had become a habit of mine. The deadlines always seemed impossible, and my manager never hesitated to dump last-minute tasks on me. That night, the office was particularly quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you acutely aware of every sound, your own breathing, the hum of the air conditioning, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. It was well past 11 p.m., and I was the only one left on the floor. My colleagues had all gone home hours ago, laughing as they wished me luck with the pile of work I still had to finish. The open-plan office stretched out before me, empty cubicles bathed in the cold glow of fluorescent lights. The occasional flicker from the lights only added to the oppressive atmosphere. I had just finished reviewing the last report when I heard it, the soft chime of the elevator arriving. The sound startled me. No one else should have been here this late, and I hadn't called for the elevator. I stood up slowly, peering over the top of my cubicle toward the hallway that led to the elevators. The doors slid open with a faint hiss, and the light inside flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a shadow shifting in the corner, but when I blinked, the elevator was empty. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe someone had pressed the button on another floor before leaving for the night. Still, a strange unease crept over me. The doors remained open longer than they should have, as if waiting for someone to step inside. When they finally closed, the soft chime echoed again, louder this time. I shook my head, laughing nervously at myself. "You're just tired," I muttered, trying to focus on packing up my things. But as I reached for my bag, the elevator chimed again. The sound made my heart jump. I turned toward the hallway, my palms sweating. This time the lights flickered not just inside the elevator, but in the hallway as well, casting strange, distorted shadows on the walls. The doors slid open again, and again it was empty. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do. My rational mind told me it was just a malfunction, but something deeper, a primal instinct, warned me to stay away. I grabbed my phone and called the building's security desk, but the line crackled with static before going dead. "Great," I muttered, gripping my phone tightly. Just what I needed. The elevator doors closed again, the sound louder than before, almost like a warning. I decided it was time to leave. Whatever was happening, I didn't want to be around to find out. The stairs seemed like the safer option. I made my way to the stairwell, my heels clicking against the tiled floor. The heavy door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing the narrow, dimly lit staircase. The air here was colder, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the corners. I started down, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. The stairwell seemed endless, each floor blending into the next. I was about to reach the ground floor when I heard it, a faint shuffling noise coming from below me. I stopped, straining to listen. The sound grew louder, more deliberate, like someone dragging their feet against the concrete steps. My heart raced as I peered down the stairwell, but all I could see was darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The sound stopped. The silence was deafening, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. And then, from above me, the elevator chimed again. My blood ran cold. I looked up through the gaps in the stairwell, and my breath caught in my throat. The elevator doors on every floor were open, lights flickering erratically, casting long, unnatural shadows. The shadows didn't stay still. They moved, slithering along the walls, crawling toward the stairs. I bolted down the remaining steps, my pulse pounding in my ears. I burst through the door to the lobby, desperate for the safety of the open space. But the lobby wasn't as I remembered it. The lights here were dimmer than they should have been, and the air was suffused with an unnatural chill. The large windows that usually looked out onto the street were fogged over, the faint outline of snow falling outside barely visible. The lobby was silent, except for the faint hum of the elevator. The elevator doors opened again. This time I didn't look. I headed straight for the main entrance, but the glass doors wouldn't budge. I pulled at them, pushed, even pounded on the glass, but they didn't move. The lock mechanism glowed faintly, as if mocking me. The elevator chimed behind me, louder now, insistent. I turned slowly, dread curling in my stomach. The elevator wasn't empty anymore. A figure stood inside, its outline distorted by the flickering light. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally thin, the suit it wore hanging loosely on its frame. The face was wrong, featureless except for two hollow pits where eyes should have been. It tilted its head as if studying me, and then stepped out of the elevator. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. The sound of its footsteps echoed in the empty lobby, a hollow, metallic clang that made my skin crawl. I backed away, searching desperately for another exit, but the figure moved faster than it should have, closing the distance between us. It stopped just a few feet away, its head tilting again. Then, in a voice that sounded like a dozen whispers layered together, it spoke. "Why are you still here?" My legs felt like lead, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The figure raised one long, bony hand, pointing at me. "You're not supposed to leave." The lights flickered again, and for a brief moment, the entire lobby was bathed in darkness. When they came back on, the figure was gone. But the elevator doors were open again, the light inside pulsing like a heartbeat. Something inside me knew I didn't have a choice. My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the elevator. The air grew colder with each step, and my vision blurred as the light from the elevator grew brighter, almost blinding. I stepped inside. The doors closed, and the elevator began to descend, but the numbers on the display didn't make sense. They weren't floors. They were random symbols, shapes I didn't recognize. The elevator's hum grew louder, the walls vibrating as if the entire structure were alive. When the doors opened again, I wasn't in the lobby. I wasn't in the building anymore. The space before me was vast and dark, the floor a mirror-like surface that reflected nothing. In the distance, shadows moved, twisted, writhing forms that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air was heavy, filled with whispers that I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. The figure from the elevator was there, standing at the edge of the darkness. It turned to me, its hollow eyes glowing faintly. "This is where you belong," it said, its voice echoing in the emptiness. And then the elevator doors closed. The last thing I saw was the figure reaching out toward me, its skeletal hand disappearing into the dark as the elevator began to rise. When the doors opened again, I was back in the lobby. Everything looked normal. Bright lights, clear windows, the hum of the building returning to its mundane rhythm. But I knew it wasn't over. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, deeper, and the air carried a faint, familiar chill. I stepped outside into the snowy night, but as I turned to look back at the building, the elevator chimed one last time, its doors opening in the distance, empty, waiting. Working late at the office was nothing new for me. Deadlines were relentless, and my boss seemed to thrive on assigning last-minute tasks just as everyone else clocked out. That night was no different. By the time I saved the final draft of the report and powered down my computer, the clock on my desk read 11:48 p.m. The building was eerily quiet, the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the vending machine the only sounds. My office was on the 15th floor of a sleek, modern high-rise in the city. At night, the polished glass walls reflected the empty, dimly lit workspace, amplifying the sense of isolation. I grabbed my coat and bag, yawning as I made my way to the elevators. The hallways were deserted, the kind of silence that felt heavy, almost oppressive. As I reached the elevator bank and pressed the down button, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, but the hallway behind me was empty. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, its stainless steel doors sliding open to reveal an empty car. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. The doors closed smoothly and the elevator began its descent. At first, everything was normal. The soft hum of the elevator motor and the subtle vibration of the car were oddly comforting. But as the numbers on the display ticked down, the elevator didn't stop at the lobby. Instead, it kept going. I frowned watching as the display continued past the lobby level, B1, B2, B3. I hadn't pressed the basement button. In fact, I wasn't even sure anyone ever went down there. The basement levels were used for storage, maintenance, and utilities, places no one had a reason to visit, especially at this hour. The elevator slowed to a stop at B4, and the doors slid open. Darkness greeted me. The fluorescent lights in the corridor beyond were flickering sporadically, casting erratic shadows on the walls. A faint, musty smell wafted into the elevator, damp concrete mixed with something metallic and sour. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the button for the lobby. But no matter how many times I pressed it, the doors didn't close. The elevator just sat there, waiting, as if it expected me to step out. "Great," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Stuck in a horror movie cliché. I leaned out slightly, peering into the dim corridor. It stretched in both directions, the walls lined with exposed pipes and conduits. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed down the hallway, swallowed quickly by the silence. I pressed the door close button again, harder this time. The elevator refused to budge. Instead, the overhead light inside the car flickered once, then dimmed. My stomach twisted with unease. A faint sound broke the silence, a low, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere down the hall. It was slow and deliberate, like someone tapping a hard object against the concrete floor. I froze, straining to pinpoint the source. The sound grew louder, closer, but I couldn't see anything in the flickering light. And then it stopped. The elevator doors started to close on their own, and I exhaled a shaky breath of relief. But just as they were about to seal shut, something moved at the edge of the light, a shadow, too large and too distorted to be human. The doors closed, and the elevator began to ascend. I sagged against the wall, my heart pounding. But my relief was short-lived. The elevator shuddered to a stop at B3. The doors opened again. This time, the hallway was brighter. The lights were steady, casting an unnatural, sterile glow over the space. But the layout was identical: exposed pipes, damp walls, and a faint chill in the air. The smell was stronger here, the metallic tang of rust or blood more pronounced. I jabbed at the lobby button, then the emergency button. Neither responded. The elevator stayed stubbornly on B3, its doors open, as if daring me to step out. I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping the handrail, my knuckles white. The low tapping noise returned, this time coming from multiple directions. It wasn't just one sound, it was several, overlapping, like a dozen people tapping in unison. A faint whisper joined the tapping. At first, it was so soft I thought I was imagining it, but it grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a language I recognized, just a garbled murmur that seemed to seep into my mind, making my skin crawl. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" The whisper stopped abruptly. The lights flickered once, plunging the hallway into total darkness. For a moment there was nothing, just the oppressive silence and the pounding of my heart. And then, in the pitch black, a voice came from the hallway. Deep, guttural, and impossibly close. "You don't belong here," I screamed, slamming my fist against the buttons. The elevator doors closed, and the car jolted upward. I clung to the railing, my pulse racing as the display ticked up past B2, B1, and finally toward the lobby. The elevator stopped at the lobby, the doors sliding open to reveal the familiar reception area. But something was wrong. The lights here were dimmer than they should have been, and the air was heavy, suffused with a faint hum that I couldn't place. I stepped out cautiously, glancing around. The front desk was empty, and the glass doors leading to the street were fogged over, the snow outside barely visible. The hum grew louder, reverberating in my chest, and I turned back to the elevator. The doors were still open, but the inside of the car was no longer the stainless steel I'd just been in. The walls were dark, almost black, and seemed to pulse faintly, like they were alive. The buttons glowed with an unnatural red light, and the faint whispering I'd heard in the basement was louder now, spilling out into the lobby. A hand emerged from the darkness of the elevator, long and skeletal, its fingers impossibly thin. Another hand followed, gripping the edge of the doorway as a figure began to crawl out. It was tall, its limbs stretched and unnatural, its skin pale and waxy. Its face was featureless, except for a wide, jagged mouth that twisted into a grin as it turned toward me. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the front desk and falling to the floor. The creature stepped fully out of the elevator, its head tilting as it studied me. "You opened the door," it said, its voice a chorus of overlapping tones. "Now you're part of this." It moved toward me, its footsteps eerily silent. I scrambled to my feet, running toward the glass doors. They didn't budge. The creature's reflection loomed behind me, its grin widening. The last thing I saw before the lights went out was its hand reaching for my shoulder, and the whispering growing deafeningly loud, drowning out everything else. When I woke up, I was in the basement, sitting on the cold, damp floor. The elevator was gone, and the hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. And from somewhere in the distance, the tapping started again. The clock on my desk read 11:13 p.m., and the office was dead silent. It wasn't unusual for me to stay late, especially when deadlines loomed. Everyone else had left hours ago, their goodbyes echoing in the empty halls as they filed out one by one. I had told them, as I always did, just one more hour, knowing full well it would be much longer. The office had a strange atmosphere at night. The usual hum of conversations, ringing phones, and the clatter of keyboards was replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. The fluorescent lights cast a pale, sterile glow over the rows of empty cubicles, making the shadows in the corners seem darker. I was finishing up the last of my reports when it happened. My office phone, the one that rarely rang even during the day, suddenly buzzed to life. The sharp ring made me jump, the sound almost deafening in the stillness. I frowned, staring at the phone. Who would be calling at this hour? Hesitant, I picked up the receiver. Hello? There was no answer, just static, a faint, crackling hiss that sent a shiver down my spine. I pulled the phone away from my ear, checking the display. The screen showed nothing, no number, just a blank, glowing surface. Hello? I tried again, my voice louder, more forceful. The static grew louder for a moment, then abruptly stopped. The line went dead. I hung up, trying to shake the unease creeping over me. It was probably just a glitch, I told myself, or maybe someone misdialing. But something about the call didn't feel right. The air in the office felt colder now, heavier, as if the silence had deepened. I returned to my work, trying to focus, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The faint sound of typing echoed from somewhere in the distance. I froze, straining to listen. It was faint but distinct, the rhythmic clatter of keys hitting the keyboard. I stood, peering over the top of my cubicle toward the open-plan office. The rows of desks were empty, their screens dark. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had started. Hello? I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Is someone there? Silence. I sat back down, shaking my head. You're just tired, I muttered. But I couldn't ignore the way the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, or the way every creak and groan of the building seemed amplified. The phone rang again. I jumped, my heart pounding in my chest. I stared at the receiver as it buzzed insistently, the sharp sound cutting through the silence like a knife. I hesitated for a long moment before picking it up. Who is this? I demanded, my voice shaking. The static returned, louder this time, interspersed with faint clicks and pops. And then, beneath the noise, I heard something, a voice. It was faint, almost drowned out by the static, but it was there. You shouldn't be here, the voice whispered. I froze, the receiver pressed to my ear. What? I whispered back, my mouth dry. Who is this? You shouldn't be here. The line went dead again. I slammed the receiver down, my hands trembling. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it a prank? A coworker messing with me? But I knew that wasn't it. The voice, the static, it had felt wrong, like it wasn't coming from anywhere I could understand. I decided I'd had enough. Whatever work was left could wait until morning. I grabbed my bag and jacket, shutting down my computer. The office felt suffocating now, the shadows pressing in around me. As I headed for the elevator, the lights above flickered, plunging the hallway into momentary darkness. When they came back on, I thought I saw movement, just a flicker, a shadow darting across the far end of the office. I quickened my pace, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I was almost out. And then the elevator stopped. The doors didn't open. The lights inside the car flickered, and the display above the doors went blank. I pressed the buttons frantically, but nothing happened. The elevator hummed softly, as if alive, but it didn't move. The phone in the elevator rang. I stared at it, my chest tightening. Slowly, I reached out and picked up the receiver. Hello? I whispered. The static returned, louder than before, almost deafening. And then, beneath it, the voice spoke again. They see you. Who? Who sees me? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. The line crackled, and then the voice whispered a single word, "Run." The elevator shuddered and began to descend, not to the lobby, but lower. The display above the doors flickered back to life, showing numbers I didn't recognize. They weren't floors, they were symbols, strange and jagged, glowing faintly. When the elevator stopped, the doors slid open to reveal a dark, empty hallway. The air was icy cold, and the faint smell of mildew and decay wafted in. I didn't want to step out, but the elevator wouldn't close. The buttons inside were dead, the light flickering overhead. I had no choice. The hallway was silent, the walls lined with pipes that dripped with condensation. My footsteps echoed as I walked, each step feeling heavier, more labored. The shadows seemed to move, shifting in the corners of my vision. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The static sound returned, not from a phone this time, but from somewhere ahead of me. It grew louder as I moved forward, until I reached a door at the end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out. I pushed it open, my breath hitching. Inside was an office, a perfect replica of my own, down to the papers scattered on the desk. The computer screen was on, displaying a blank document. The phone on the desk rang. I didn't want to answer it, but my hand moved on its own, picking up the receiver. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, clearer now. "What do you want?" I whispered. "To join us." The lights flickered and the room grew colder. Shadows crept along the walls, gathering in the corners, coalescing into shapes. Faces began to form, hollow eyes and twisted mouths, all staring at me. I dropped the phone, stumbling back. The shadows moved toward me, the faces whispering in unison. "Stay with us." I turned and ran, my breath coming in short gasps. The hallway seemed endless, stretching out before me no matter how far I ran. The whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. And then I saw it, a figure standing at the end of the hallway, silhouetted against the flickering light. It was tall and thin, its face featureless except for a wide, jagged grin. The elevator doors stood open behind it. I ran toward the figure, desperation overpowering my fear. As I got closer, it didn't move, didn't react, but its grin widened, impossibly wide, stretching across its entire face. I dove into the elevator, slamming the close button. The doors shut just as the figure stepped forward, its hand reaching for me. The elevator began to rise, the lights flickering erratically. I collapsed against the wall, trembling. When the doors opened again, I was back in the lobby. But something was wrong. The air felt heavy, and the shadows in the corners were darker, shifting unnaturally. And then the phone at the reception desk began to ring.